All right, this is Sweeney here from Startup Jungle TV, and right now we're with Jesse Farmer. And Jesse Farmer is a computer programmer and entrepreneur living in San Francisco, California. Now he's the co-founder at Dev Bootcamp, and you're also co-founder at Everlyn. Is that right?
Yeah, although I'm not at either company anymore, but I helped start both of them. I co-founded both of them.
Well, then what are you up to right now?
Right, right now I'm just taking the first break I've had in 5 or 6 years, I think,
Okay.
and also just doing things I enjoy. I just joined the board of a local nonprofit called Mission Bit that runs free programming classes for San Francisco public school kids. So
Awesome.
getting involved in that. I'll be teaching a class this February, and um, just hanging
Kind of,
out
kind of in
basically.
between, are you still doing any kind of programming work, or do you have anything else?
I do. I mean, programming for me has always been. Um, I sometimes joke with my students that I don't really like programming that much, uh, but it's not really something I do. I don't know. I don't program for the sake of programming.
Hmm.
So Um, I program because there's something else I want to do, and it's a great tool in the toolbox. But um,
So what do you actually like doing more then? Because you also mentioned, focused on web development, user experience, viral marketing. I've seen, you even got media mentions, of course.
yeah, um, I don't know. I don't have a story for why I'm
Yeah.
interested. For me, it's the opposite, which is like at Dev Bootcamp, students would often sit down and ask me. I studied math, so
Hmm.
my academic training's in math, and students would often ask me, they'd come up, they'd say, well, should I study this, like X, Y, or Z? And I'd say, not really jokingly, sort of like, I think everybody should learn everything. So I mean, there's a guitar back there. I've played music for a really long time. My
Yeah.
family's a really musical family. I don't know. I like being interested in things. Um, uh,
Have you have you
I
read
just bought
Mastery, by the way?
I have a copy of it, but I haven't read it.
Okay. Because I mean, it's an interesting thing versus going deep in something compared to knowing, a much wider spectrum. Like my
Well,
skill set tends to be a bit wider as compared to someone who's deeper in one specific area.
I try my darndest to do both, I guess is how I think about it. So I tend to do things serially. Like at any given moment, I'm generally only focusing on one thing, or a handful of things, but but I'm pretty intense about it. So I haven't done any, for example, viral growth hacky kind of stuff
Hmm.
in the sense of, I don't know, building something with the intention of making it go viral since mm, 2010, maybe something like that. And even then, back then, it was much sparser than it was 2 or 3 years before that. So from like 2007 to 2010, that was basically what I thought about all the time, every day for 3 years. And then it's tapered off. And that stuff is still there, and it's useful to have that tool. And it comes in handy, for example, when thinking about how to um, get attention or those sorts of things.
Hmm.
Um,
Like
I
driving
like,
buzz.
yeah. I think honestly, I think some of the things that I use to think effectively about growth hacking, that term. I have such a love-hate relationship with that term.
It's
Uh,
become a very loaded term.
it is. Well, I mean, oh God, we could talk about that. But I actually think it's really interesting what's happened. Um, and what's more interesting is how everyone is sort of talking past each other. But and anyways, yeah,
I
a lot
mean,
of
we
that
can
stuff
we
just
can go
helps
into it
deal
a
with
little
the
bit. We
press.
don't have to.
No, no. I mean, I'm happy to because I haven't really talked with it much
Okay.
about with people, but uh, yeah, that mindset, I guess, or how I thought about that helps me deal with, say, the press or something like that. You know, knowing how to say a thing so that it gets repeated or something like that.
Gotcha. So kind of having an infectious kind of way to create something, maybe
Yeah,
making
and
something that kind of
honestly,
sticks.
yeah, for me, this might sound strange, but as I've sort of dived deeper into a bunch of different subjects, the last 2 years, I spent basically every day, like 10 to 12 hours a day, either teaching people how to program or teaching teachers how to be more effective at teaching people how to program, like one of those two things. Um, and there's a lot of stuff related. Like to me, even if you were to listen to or read things I used to write or things I used to talk about before I did anything in teaching, for me, a lot of growth work is ultimately about uh, I think the right technical term is empathy, but I don't necessarily mean it in a touchy-feely way. I mean it in the way of being able to experience the world as somebody else. So understanding what's interesting, what's not interesting, how to make something stand out to somebody, um, how to make them feel compelled or excited or eager to share something with somebody else. For me, has always involved thinking about like at Everlane, for example, it's about, well, what do they want to identify with? What do they want to aspire to? Um, and it's the same with teaching. Like, wh- how is the student confused? Um, why are they saying what they're saying right now? How can you write a piece of curriculum that creates the right impression in the student's mind while simultaneously addressing preemptively, hopefully, the things that will confuse them? Like, um, I just taught a bunch of
Hmm.
students how to count in binary in about 15 minutes, I think. None of them had any experience programming computers, and so like you go in assuming, for example, that most of them assume binary has something to do with computers, but it doesn't really, any more than counting in decimal has to do with being a human. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, 2,000 years ago we didn't do that, so
Yeah.
it's not like an inherent part of being a human. Uh, so you try to address those things preemptively. So you're like, hey, you might think that binary has something to do with the computer, but it doesn't really. And they're like, oh, interesting, okay, and they kind of wake up a little bit,
Are you
reevaluate the situation afresh, and so on.
are you studied in direct response at all, or have you ever read any kind of direct response material, or no?
No.
Okay. Well, because a lot of, some people are saying, that growth hacking is partially, and marketing now is partially moving more towards, direct response, old principles of the past. And one thing, when you are doing, say, a longer sales page, what you're trying to do is you're trying to proactively hit every single thing that's going on in their mind. Every single thing they're worried about. Oh, it only takes 15 minutes a day, so it doesn't matter how much time you have, or you can do it anywhere. You're trying to answer all those questions before they have them.
Mhm.
So I feel like that's a somewhat similar approach in the sense of you're trying to, think ahead of time what they're going to ask and what they're going to deal with, and you're trying to help them with that.
Um, yeah, totally. I think that um, I think that the same principle applies to nearly anything that, honestly, anything that involves other people.
Yeah.
Like anytime you want other people to do something, like convince them to do something or show them that something they want to do is possible or any of that, to me, thinking in those terms is always really helpful. And direct marketing is definitely a very like sort of surgical example of that. But even I can tell you all those things were stuff that we were thinking about when we were designing the checkout flow at Everlane, right? Which is like what are they really anxious about, and how do we address those anxieties?
That kind of
What
crosses over into user experience then.
it does, yeah. I mean, I think that stuff is critical for user experience too. Like when I was thinking of how to design the classroom experience at Dev Boot Camp, it was an exercise. I would like, um, I'd actually go stand outside the classroom as if I were a student on the first day, sort of like close my eyes, walk in, be like, okay, what am I nervous? Yes. Like, what am I feeling? What's going on around me? What should I see? What, I go over here first, and I go over here. I sit down. When do I start programming? What's that like? If maybe I've never done it before. So, um, so that to me is that is just a design exercise. Although that muscle feels like the same muscle I am when I'm sitting down next to a student, being like, um, walk me through what you think you're confused about, and in trying to. I mean, the job of a good teacher is to be clearer about what a student is confused about than the student is, because they're probably not going to be able to like explain to you. And that's the same with like a customer, right? When you're like, well, what do you want? Oh, I want, you know, it'd be great if it could fly. Okay, but why do you want it to fly? They might not even be able to answer that coherently. Or even when you just ask them that question, they might come up with some post hoc explanation because they haven't really thought about it themselves. And so their answer, it's not like it's a lie. It's just they're not clear enough about what's going on inside their own head to articulate it to somebody else. And same with direct response. Except with direct response, you don't have any kind of generally any kind of interactivity. So you have to like encode everything in the page, as opposed to like a teaching scenario where I'm sitting right next to the student. So, but that's similar to a textbook too, right? Where you have to like it's like solo mode, and you have to somehow guide a student, even though every student is like a little different, and what they're confused about is a little different through some path of learning. So I think of all these things as being related, at least
How
at
do
some
you
sufficiently abstract level.
how do you deal with, because something I've read about, especially when it comes to teaching, is you're kind of only as quick as your slowest guy. So if there's two slow people in the room, they can kind of slow you down. I mean, this is more so in like a general public school teaching
Sure.
scenario, but in general, how have you approached that? Have you had to deal with that?
It's no, it depends on the format. So uh, that's only true if you require everything happen synchronously, right? Like
Hmm.
which is how most public school classrooms, not all public school classrooms, but I don't think it's too crazy to say that's the default, right? Which is students are in the same place at the same time, learning the same thing at any given moment. Today's lesson is la 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 la,
Hmm.
and then the teacher is standing up front, um, and students can't go faster if they want to go faster. Students can't go deeper if they want to go deeper. Um, and it becomes problems at both ends of the spectrum. So students who are absorbing material very quickly in that highly synchronized environment get frustrated and bored, and will, depending on their maturity or personality, but might start acting out. And the same thing is true of students who are way at the tail end. They become overwhelmed, and psychological defense mechanisms kick in so that they uh, sort of like reduce the impact on their own ego of them being behind.
Yeah.
This is stupid. I don't need to learn this. This is dumb anyways, right? Stuff like that. And then maybe they start acting out. And it's kind of funny because both of those outcomes, they kind of look the same often. A student falling asleep in class, okay? Uh, a student being too chatty or too disruptive. Um, a student not doing their homework. Plenty of advanced students, for example, have that attitude too. I don't need to do this. It's not worth my time. I'll get 100% on the test anyhow, and that'll get a B, and that's good enough for me. Like this is beneath me.
Yeah.
And you see that at Dev Boot Camp too. But we give them a little more flexibility, and we also set a different expectation, which is uh, an environment helps because it's so intense. The students are there 6 days a week for 10 to 12 hours a day, so it's easy to build. And our students are older, so they're mostly like 28 to 34 or so. Um, but it's easier in that environment to build a sense of camaraderie and a sense of like that person I really care about is struggling. I really want to help them. Um,
So it kind of becomes a kind of tribal community type aspect where the stronger ones kind of pick up the weaker ones a little bit.
yeah. In fact, we almost insist. Well, yes. Culture is a tricky thing. We can't
Yeah.
insist on it because as soon as we insist on it, then it's not a part of their culture. It's something that we've mandated. But um, we that's one of the easier things to have happen and like make happen organically without mandating it. Uh, just because of the nature of the environment, which isn't what you have at a public school. But we have plenty of students who are way faster at Dev Boot Camp, and the way I see it is they have like um, it's like every student has some amount of energy or focus or whatever to spend on learning. The students who are behind spend all their energy and they're still not caught up, and the students who are ahead end with this gigantic surplus. And it's just a question of where that surplus is redirected. And depending on the student, if you let them redirect it how they see fit, it can be some. I shouldn't make it seem like every advanced student. Like some advanced
Yeah.
students you don't even have to tell them they're right on the ball. Like, oh, I knocked this out of the park, so I decided to write up a blog post about the 5 things that confused me and share it with the rest of the class. Great, awesome. Um, and they realized pretty quickly that not only is that like a good thing to do, but they get recognition as the kind of person who does that, right? As like the helpful person. Um, so we try to find ways to redirect that excess energy into something more productive. Uh,
Similar.
with
Kind of sounds similar to the kids that have way too much energy, and that's why you put them into sports or karate or something like that when they're growing up, so they redirect the energy, and then the problem goes away.
yeah, they're not gonna. I mean, yeah, it's like you're not gonna have. Um, yeah, it's not gonna vanish. It's still gonna be there. We're lucky because we have adults, so they have, for lack of a better term, I mean, they just have a more well-developed like executive function, right? Right, like more
Yeah.
willpower. They can say, I'm going to focus on this for 30 minutes because my family back home is depending on me doing well with this program. And a 13-year-old is going to be like, I'm going to sit down and focus. And, oh, what's that over there? That's bye. And this is it's a different. It's like physiologically, there's a difference in terms of how they're able to manage their own attention. So we have different sets of tools that are available to us. I don't envy the job of a public school teacher because they're a lot of the things we do at Dev Boot Camp would not be possible at a public school. The administration would not let them do it. Um,
Do you have
at most
any
public
specific
schools.
examples, or even with Dev Boot Camp, when we first started, we taught this way, and some of the big things that we learned along the way and changes that we made that made the process better.
Sure. Well, I mean, I would say at one level we give or gave uh, teachers a ton of autonomy. So the way we saw the relationship between the curriculum, the, the picture I have, I mean, this depends a lot on the school, so I don't want to be charged with overgeneralizing, but
Yeah.
I think most teachers feel like the curriculum is like, teacher, your job is to teach this curriculum. Here's the thing you teach, and it's essentially a script. And yeah, you can improvise every once in a while. I mean, it's not like people are watching you all the time, but it's basically like this is what you need to teach. Um, And at a high enough level in terms of this semester of this year, you need to learn these 5 topics, whatever learning those topics means, is mandated by the state often and encoded in things like the Common Core standards and so on. And at Dev Bootcamp, we don't have that, but we also, the relationship is slightly different. It's more like, it's like I think of curriculum as like an armory. The teachers who all know what they're doing, I hope, because if they don't, then we made a hiring mistake, right? But they know what they're doing. Should know roughly what students should be learning that day. And they should be able to like go into the armory and get whatever weapons they need to sort of go to battle that day. And sometimes they might be fastening their own weapon. And so it's not like you're not teaching the prepared material. Like you're not administering the whatever test. You're not giving homework assignments out of the back of this book. You decided that instead it should be a field trip day or something like that. So we tend to give teachers just a ton of leeway in that regard, because they know, hopefully, if they're doing their job well, know what they're the ones with the relationships with the students, so they know what's working and what's not. And I mean that's a big one, but there are other things like that. It's mostly around the expectations we set for the students, which are much higher than I think a public school, and the teachers for that matter. The expectations we set for teachers are much higher. But then we also give, I think, teachers significantly more autonomy than they would get at most public schools. So that's sort of the trade-off. I mean, we do a lot of the things that a lot of these teacher accountability folks want to do, but the teachers at Dev Bootcamp are happy with them because they get a bunch of other stuff in return. Like teachers, if a teacher is giving a lecture, they're videotapes. Mm-hmm. And if you can imagine, some schools do it, but teachers generally don't like having their classrooms recorded. They feel like their big brother is watching, right? But at Dev Bootcamp, it's like, no, it's so you as the lecturer understand viscerally what it's like to be a member of your audience. And the expectation is you're going to watch your performance afterwards. But they're not giving the lectures all the time. So in a public school, what is that, an hour and a half of video? At Dev Bootcamp, it's going to be 15 to 20 minutes of a lecture. So it's like the structure we've changed in certain ways that are outside the bound of how a public school could operate that make it easier for us to do certain things.
So just to clarify, how like a traditional Dev Bootcamp, it's 9 weeks.
Yes.
And 6 days a week, you said, around 10 to 12-hour days, or?
Yeah, I mean.
And what does that day look like? So, because now you're saying, so the lecture's only 15 minutes, but they'll have an outcome for the day.
The core rhythm is based around a series of programming challenges. Mm-hmm. Sometimes only a few big ones, sometimes many small ones. So that's like the core unit, and students generally work in pairs. I don't know the percentages, but it's probably like 60% pair, 20% solo, 20% group, mm-hmm. Something like that. And we just want them writing code as much as possible, basically. And lectures should happen either to set the stage for what's about to happen, like give everyone some base level of common understanding for about what's coming up, or when students reach a place where enough of them are confused about a particular thing to give a talk about whatever that particular thing is. And oftentimes we have mechanisms for students proposing talks. Honestly, I would say on balance, students want us to give talks more than we want to give them.
So which is almost an interesting dynamic, because I would say that traditionally, most of the time, there's too much lecturing probably and too much talks. So it kind of
Yeah.
seems like you guys have actually flipped the script, where instead they're kind of desiring and demanding the talk by the time it comes, so then they're paying more attention to it.
Yeah, that wasn't like some clever trick, although it kind of sounded like it. It was more like we started with an opinion that lectures weren't as effective, and also most of us personally did not want to give them, and students would start demanding them. Like, we really want lectures. Okay. And then we'd give one, and they'd be like, that was amazing. We'd be like, okay, all right. um, and yeah, so we, I think there are things lectures are good for. So it's just a question of understanding that and then using one when appropriate. But they're not, they shouldn't be, they're just, yeah, a lecture is just like another weapon in the armory.
I was gonna say it kind of
Yeah,
goes back to the armory. For certain
yeah,
things, the lecture does come out and it works really well,
yeah.
but for the most part,
And I'll say actually, as students become, and this is true, I think, universally across any subject, as people become more advanced in the subject, lectures are actually a better, an almost ideal way of learning. Um, Basically, once the closer the learner is to thinking like an expert, the better a lecture works.
hmm, interesting.
Um, it depends on the lecturer, but I would say the default, like, okay lecturer, who's, think of like a math class you took in college that was taught by a math grad student. He's probably, unless he's an exceptional graph. I presumed he was a he, but
I
hey,
imagine there's probably a lot of guys in math. Could be wrong.
yes, I mean it's virtually all men, like most graduate level science. Anyways, uh, was probably not a good teacher, and probably talked to the class like an expert would. You know, like a student would ask him to clarify something, and he'd like either re-explain it in the same way or re-explain it in um, different terms, but like equally sophisticated terms. And it's like a kind of mind blindness you get as you become expert in something, where you're no longer able to relate to the world in the way a beginner does, and you don't realize you're failing in that regard. You think like, oh, why aren't they getting it? I'm telling them what it is.
Yeah.
Um,
It's kind of like you're a mixture of you're too close to it and you're basically inside of it, so you can't really understand the outside perspective anymore because you're just that deep within.
yeah, it can work both ways. Part of it is just the I think when you're an expert, you have such a fine-grained picture, like both on a small scale and on a big scale, and you have so many sophisticated ways of thinking about it. When a mathematician, I would say math especially, because as a language, it's so like compressed.
Yeah.
you know, you're like, oh yeah, this. I don't know. You have some piece of math jargon, and it's meant to entail this like amazing picture, and that's what the person saying it sees in their head, but it's been compressed to like this one word or this one formula, and then they say the formula or the words to the student hears them, but it's not like they have that picture in their head. So they're like, what am I supposed to do with this? You have to like unpack it for me. And you're like, okay, well here's the definition of it. And instead of one word, it's like 5 math words. And they're like, that doesn't this isn't clarifying anything for me. And you're like, well that's the definition. I'm sorry, it's so hard for
Yeah.
you. All right. So I honestly, when I'm doing growth hacking kind of stuff, there's a similar thing that happens when, like, if I look at a landing page, I usually don't talk about it in the terms I've been talking about teaching and stuff,
Hmm.
but there's a kind of language that is for the person talking, and there's a kind of language that's for the person listening. or a kind of language that's for the person writing and a kind of language that's for the person reading. So if you're a brand, let's say, like Everlane, um, there's a bunch of words and ideas and concepts that we use internally to talk about Everlane and what we're doing and what our culture is. But it would be silly to put those on the front page and share them with the reader because those words don't mean anything to them. In fact, not only would they confuse them, but likely they'd misunderstand or misconstrue them in a way that would you'd use those words with 5 different people and they'd walk away with 5 different pictures of what was happening. Right? So it's like a different
Do you have a
vernacular.
soft example by any chance or no?
Yeah. What's a good example? It's so common, honestly. Like, which is funny why I can't. I would say almost anytime someone asks me to read their copy, this is like the first thing I see. Where take like I don't know, take like an airline booking site for
Hmm.
example. They'll be like, "Oh, what's your receiver ID?" You're like, what the hell is a receiver ID? That's like some phrase you use internally in
Hmm.
your airline shit. I'm like, I'm not part of your airline shit. Or okay, I called my insurance company the other day,
Okay.
and I
Sounds
needed,
horrible.
yeah, I needed, there was like a, I don't know, there was some mix-up, and I needed to talk to a particular department. And they're like, oh, well, we're not the receiver department, we're the billing department. You need to talk, and also, we're part of this sub company, not this other sub company. And I'm like, I don't need like, if do I really need to understand your like internal hierarchy in order to in order to have a conversation with you? No, your job as a customer support person is to talk to me in terms that I understand and not insist that I understand things. Like, do I really need like an org chart
Yeah.
of
Do I
like
need a
this,
translator
of
just
this,
to
of
figure
this, of
out?
this? Yeah, right. It's like, no, you need to understand how I understand the world, and you need to put me in front of the person who is most likely to be able to help me and explain it to me in terms of, oh, well, you're not talking to Blue Cross Blue Shield, you're talking to this other company that administers certain sets of contracts for Blue Cross. I don't, why are you telling me this? I don't need to know this.
Yeah.
You're crazy. So I see that kind of stuff happening all the time. And it's really hard, I think, for people to understand that. It's like seeing that a thing they wrote or said will either confuse or frustrate um, another person. Especially when you're doing brand stuff, I think brandy things tend to attract people who we saw this all the time when we were starting Everlane. Like people who are starting their own brands, and they're going to go have their own line or whatever. They're doing it for themselves, and they care about what their collection says about them, not what it will say for their customers when their customers purchase them, right? They're like, it's like it's all about the person making the clothing. It's not about the people. There's like no understanding of how other people will be relating to this, and it surfaced in really funny ways that seemed to me business wise like totally crazy. We'd be like, hey, we really love this belt you guys are making. Can we sell some? And they'd go, no, no, we don't want to split our collection. If you want to sell our stuff, you have to sell our whole collection.
Yeah.
It tells our story. The customers aren't going to understand our story unless you have our whole collection. It's like they don't care about your story. Why don't they care about their story? They don't care about your
Yeah.
story. Like, I'm sorry, right? So uh, I see that stuff all the time. Um, and it's a hard thing to see. It's much easier to see in other people than it is in oneself. Uh, but there are ways around it. I mean, that's like why, for example, we at Dev Bootcamp record teachers giving lectures. when you're watching a lecture, even as an expert, it's easy to see when a lecturer accidentally slips in a piece of jargon that goes over a student's head. But when you're in the middle of giving a lecture, you're not, especially if you're nervous about it, you fall back on instinct and you fall back to these defaults about how you think about the world, and that's just what bubbles up. So you have to build structure to correct yourself like that.
In a similar vein, with Everland, I noticed, you guys say that most of it kind of seems like the operations are in San Francisco, whereas the creative and the production operated out of Los Angeles, but then the biggest customer base was in New York. So I find that kind of an interesting, divide of like, how did you guys stay in touch with your customers and understand, their story? For example, I mean, you're all West Coast, they're on the East Coast, they're dealing with different temperatures and climates and kind of a different culture. So how did you guys kind of face that or adjust to that?
Hmm.
I mean, it almost seems ironic that you would think San Francisco clothing, would kind of at least stay on in the California, the kind of West Coast, and instead it ends up being in New York.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a certain aesthetic. I mean, that's, yeah, but, well, I mean, New York is, I don't know how many people, 3 million? I don't know. Lots of people. San Francisco's 800,000. I mean, they're just different markets.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, LA is closer to New York size. Um, part of it is just it's like the zeitgeist of, honestly, I think the difference is the East and the West Coast have more in similar than they do with the interior of the country. Speaking as someone who grew up in the Midwest. um, uh, Early on, we debated moving to New York, but we didn't because I refused. Uh, and it
Pretty
turned out
funny.
not to it turned out not to really matter. That stuff didn't matter much from our customers' perspective. Like, I don't think that ever presented any challenge in terms of figuring out what people wanted. The folks at Everland travel frequently, and obviously, like a half quarter, like a third to a half of the team is in LA. Um, it was more tricky operationally of managing those two offices. Uh, and we had to figure out how to do that effectively. Um, and like engineering is up here in San Francisco too. So, uh, and the yeah, so um, it wasn't too bad. We had the LA office because of the people. Like, there were people we hired who wanted to stay in LA. And they were very critical for the early success of Everlane. So we built an LA office around them, essentially.
Hmm. Good
And it's
talent.
like, yeah. So it was like, all right, well, gotta make that work. Yeah, but the customer bit, the cultural bit, didn't. I know that wasn't really a surprise. And honestly, most of the team is pretty deeply connected to either New York or LA. Like Michael, my co-founder, uh, spent 4 years working in finance in New York, I think, and it might not have been, but it was like something like 2 to 4 years, something like that. Um, our first engineer, Nanyu, who's the lead engineer there, uh, lived in New York for a long, long time. So we have a lot of people who come from New York to San Francisco to work for Everlane. In fact, there was a hiring thing there we did. I wasn't. I've only been in New York once in my life, so what do I know? But
Hence why you didn't want to go.
yeah, go west. It's sort of, we have these hiring campaigns where we sort of urge people to go west, seek adventure, and we for some of our like community and marketing and media roles had uh, a sort of hiring event in New York in like a big room, and it was definitely oversubscribed. It's like a gigantic room full of people who wanted to work for Everlane. Um, uh, so it's been challenging, but mostly like logistically, coordinating the functions of the two offices. And it was never a challenge in terms of uh, Like, well, hey, what should we be building? Oh, we built something that was like too San Francisco and not New York enough. Everyone there was pretty hyper conscious of that stuff because most of, yeah, they just are. So.
Interesting. And what I mean, what kind of role? Because it seems like Everlane is a bit of a kind of anti-brand, kind of anti-designer, but at the same time, it is obviously a brand, and the brand is just molded differently. Instead of buying an overly expensive logo, you're kind of buying into the idea of it, I guess you could say maybe.
Yeah.
How did that affect it? And how was it kind of hard to get people on board with the hey, you're going to buy something that has no logo, and I mean,
No, no,
because
no,
this
no,
is
no.
when American Apparel too, I assume, was kind of starting and things were moving in that direction. But
Well, American Apparel started in '99, I think. No. Well, I think they actually started in '99, but they didn't start doing retail until 2002, 2004,
Mhm.
something like that. I mean, we started in 2010.
Okay.
And we sold our first stuff in 2011. Is that right? That's right. Yeah. So our first sale was the doors to our store opened in November of 2011. Um, so we're definitely, I would say, solidly like the generation after American Apparel. In fact, those key early employees who were in LA were all former American Apparel people. Um, no, honestly, the brand. This will sound weird, I think, especially to brandy people. They don't. I don't think they like this story.
I'm
Uh,
excited.
yeah. Well, neither Michael nor I had any experience in fashion or retail, and what the brand was kind of like an intellectual exercise. Like, I think there are certain things when you're thinking about. First, it's like, well, what is a brand? Um, there's one picture of a brand which is it goes back to this like us versus them focus. I think most people when they're starting a brand are like, okay, well, what do we want our story to be, and we have to tell that story. Versus, um, there's a sort of empirical brand, or like we can call there's like the brand, and then there's the effective brand. It's like the difference between uh, a company's stated values, like here are 10 values of our company, but then like their actual values when you see what people actually care about when you're sitting down working with a company. So the sort of effective brand, empirical brand, is really whatever. Um, I mean, there's two directions. It's like when you say Everlane, what do you think of? And then there's a set of things where if you think of it, you think of Everlane. The latter is more of the company's brand, right? It's like the ideas that bring Everlane to mind are, whether you like it or not, what the company's brand is. You like if you're like spammy Facebook game company, people go Zynga,
Yeah.
and that's their brand. Like I don't like not among everybody, but right, but among a lot of people, that's their brand or part of their brand. It's not the totality of their brand, and that's a sort of like a fact. Like it doesn't matter that it's not part of their story, that Zynga isn't broadcasting that. It's still what people associate with Zynga. Um, so with that understanding of brand in mind, the question is how do you form those associations? The first book I ever read, this was years ago, this is like 2006, that made me start to think about this in a more rigorous way was this great book by Reese and Trout called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, which a lot of people know.
I
But
keep getting recommended to that, and that's probably the fourth time I've heard it. So now I gotta.
yeah, it's super. It's not rigorous, but it definitely uh, it was sort of the nail in the coffin for me of um, it helped me understand how to take marketing seriously as like a serious thing worth deliberate thought. For me is what that book did for me. And like the first rule is be first, and be first in a category. The second rule is if you can't be first in a category, then invent a category in which you are first. So the examples that it uses in the book are like who's the first person who flew solo across the Atlantic? and you may or may not know it, but it's Charles Lindbergh is the first person to fly solo. And then if you were to say who's the second, I don't know,
Yeah.
some guy maybe. But then if you ask people, okay, well, who's the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic? They go, oh yeah, Amelia Earhart. And she was technically the third person to fly across the Atlantic. So uh, as an exercise, and there's 22
Yeah.
sort of things like that, followed by, but like that's what a brand is, right? What is Charles Lindbergh's brand? Well, it's like the person who flew across the Atlantic. And it's not because you say Charles Lindbergh and they think that, it's because he's like the answer to that question. So when we're building Everlane's brand, it's um, the way I think of building a brand is you look at what's out there right now, which whether you like it or not is how people are going to relate to what you're doing. It doesn't matter what Everlane was doing. Everyone's going to be trying to find some way to relate it to other apparel brands out there. Is it more or less luxurious than this other brand? Is it more or less cost, whatever? And you sort of like you want to come at it at sort of like a 90-degree angle. So it's not like if everyone is black, you want to be white
Hmm.
or something. It's more like if everybody's black and white, you want to be red. So something like that, right? And then you stand out. And there are other considerations too, but that's how we thought about it. Like we thought about, okay, what if we built a apparel brand that was built for the web, that was built for the web, not just as like a piece of technology, but as a little village with its own culture, its own set of things it values. And what does it value? Well, it values things like transparency. Um, it values things like honest dealing. It values things like, uh, well, anyhow, right? And then you say, okay, well, now let's look at apparel brands. And honestly, there was like this wonderful intersection, especially with like transparency, where most fashion brands either don't care about that, like it's just not part of their brand. Not that they're against transparency, but they don't. It's not.
Yeah.
It's just not part of it. Yeah. Or they're sort of avowedly against it, and they cultivate this kind of aloof, distant, very austere picture of themselves, and it works. Uh, so it's like, okay, how about we be not? How about we instead of being more austere, we be more human? Like, how about instead of being more like holding our cards close to our chest, we put all our cards on the table and stuff like that. And that's sort of how the early contours of Everlane's brand came to take shape. And it was exciting because those sorts of things are also what the web, which would be our customer acquisition channel, so to speak, really values. So you do things like an infographic about how t-shirts are made. And other brands don't like it because they don't necessarily want the information out there. Or whatever. Uh, but the web likes it because it's like a new treat. They're like, yay, here's something we didn't know before. Share it. Look at this. This thing's cool. Um, so that's how we started building. That's like the way we approached building the brand.
Okay. In a similar vein, especially since you are in California, how do you see the current, Uber versus Lyft, especially on a brand standpoint?
um, I actually, I think Lyft did it deliberately. But
It does seem like they have.
yeah, I mean, I know a bunch of the folks there. Goggin, who does the Growth Hacker Conference. Um, uh, but well, he isn't there anymore now. He's at Sprig. But yeah, their brand is it's the right call. So they did what I was talking about earlier, which is like Uber is this like super serious like rich people thing, basically, right? It's like your tinted windows, limousines. Um, and they were like, okay, well, if they're going to be serious, we're going to be whimsical. And then they went whole hog on that front. So to me, that's the right call, which is like if you just want to, if you were to be another serious thing, I don't think it would have captured people's attention quite as well compared to like Sidecar, let's say. You're like, you just don't think of anything when you think of Sidecar. Um, it's not differentiated sharply enough from Uber. It's like Uber, but cheaper, I guess.
Yeah.
But Lyft is not. It's not. I mean, it is like Uber but cheaper. But it's like, oh, it's the one with the pink mustaches, or oh, it's the one where they bump your fist when you get into the car. Oh, it's the one where you sort of expect to have a funny conversation with your driver when you sit in, whereas you expect to have a professional conversation with an Uber driver. Um, so brand wise, I feel like Lyft was pretty much the perfect counterpoint to Uber. Uh, and I guess one of the things I believe about brands is there's no such thing as like an absolute brand. Like it's all about like people only understand the world in terms of things that people only understand new things about the world in terms of things they already understand, and that includes brands. So you have a new product that comes on, they're going to immediately be trying to relate it. Like, how does this relate to my world, to things I already know? So I have to think about what that meant for Uber, but if Lyft were first, then like Uber would be the perfect counterpoint to Lyft, right? That's sort of how I think about it. On the other hand, Lyft being first seems weird because you're like, why do you have these pink mustaches, right? It seems like an unjustified decision. Whereas because Uber was first, it's like, okay, I see the point to your counterpoint.
It seems like they kind of also helped, well, the adoption and the idea and being okay with, oh, well, now I'm using an app to order a car. And one thing I noticed about
That's
Lyft
probably
too,
true.
that they toted, so I mean they kind of spearheaded the way there, broke the ice, what have you. Like, I wonder how, for example, Facebook, in kind of a similar way, Facebook before MySpace, MySpace before Facebook, because MySpace kind of did start. I mean, you had Friendstar and a few other things, but MySpace was really the one with a lot of people on. I know I used to message people, meet people, etc. And then Facebook kind of slowly grew. And obviously, the information shared on MySpace, pictures here and there, a bulletin, maybe some messaging. Whereas Facebook has gone into this share everything about my life, and it's
Right.
okay and it's normal.
Um, yeah, I'm not sure about the ordering there. I do think the fact that Facebook came after those uh, makes made it easier for them in some way. Um, but I mean, anytime you have a space that has a lot of people in it, there's going to be some people who are like not necessarily super comfortable there. Either because they feel like this isn't really worth my time anymore or whatever, and you can always try to carve out a space just for them and try to make them feel special, which is sort of how I think about Facebook, which is like um, when they started, obviously,
Yeah.
uh, which is that you go, hey, college students, you don't want to be on MySpace. We're gonna build a thing just for you. So it creates that kind of associational thing. And if you do it right, it works really well. In fact, I think that's generally the only way to build new communities is to like
Kind of start small.
take people from some other community, some small group who all identify with each other, and build a space for them, and slowly manage the expansion of it. Compare it to Google Plus, I think, where like Google's idea of how to build a community is like, um, we'll get 10,000 people and lock them in like Candlestick Park or something, and we'll call it a community. It's like 10,000 strangers. You're all in the same football stadium now. Go community. Like, that's not how it works. They're like, who are you people? Why are you all here? I don't know if I want to be. Are you going to kill me? Like, it's a very weird way. Versus, oh, you're all college students at the same school. Like when Facebook first launched, you couldn't even add friends from other universities. I don't know if you remember that, but
I was in high school when it launched, and I actually remembered my
right. Couldn't add.
I couldn't even get on, but I remember my cousins, kind of showing me it, and that also aided in it too, because I was like, man, I want to join, but I can't join.
Yeah, it launched. I think my second year of college. I think, or very early in my second year of college. And yeah, I was like, oh, I can't even add my high school friends to other schools now. Huh. But I'll add all my friends here at my university.
Kind of interesting.
Yeah. And they slowly broke down those barriers. But when people made that transition from, for example, allowing high school students and then removing that barrier, that was one, and then also opening up to anybody, there were all kinds of conversations around, like, will this be the end of Facebook? Will it suddenly dilute the value that Facebook provides? And they designed it intelligently so that I don't know, when you're building a community, there's this kind of evaporative effect where the value people get is a function of the other people participating in the community. So the most valuable members tend to leave as the community grows because they don't get value out of that community anymore. And then like the average value of the community decreases. And then that new layer evaporates because it's no longer valuable enough for them, and then so on. That's like a very common way that online communities dissolve. See, for example, Dig. And there are ways to manage it. Like Reddit manages it by allowing people to form sub-communities inside the site. Right? So instead of evaporating and like leaving the site, you go, no, we're going to start our own tribe inside Reddit. And you still retain, there's like a broader Reddit culture, but there's also more specific subcultures. And Dig, for example, didn't like allow that at all, right? There was like this one monoculture, and either you participated in it or you didn't. And if it wasn't for you, then you had no choice but to leave the site entirely. And Facebook does it by, well, you basically, every person has their own little universe, and you get to opt in to. So I think those are the mechanics that allow these things to grow without just like bleeding valuable users as the site grow. I also think that's why when sites, if you have community sites that launch and they start with celebrities, that's usually a bad approach. I can't think of an instance where it worked, to be honest. Like, because celebrities are going to be the first ones to leave because they're the people who get the least amount of value out of a small social network. Because everyone wants to pay attention to them, and they don't really care about these other people. Versus if you have 1 million users, celebrities will just be, clamoring to get in because there's enough attention there for it to be worth their while.
Well, I know Sean Ellis has a, I think it's called growth hacking, something like that. And it almost seems to be kind of a Reddit format, except just for growth hackers.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a, I mean, I don't know if considering him a celebrity is the right, word for it, but he is obviously up there.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's celebrities at every level. Like, there are famous mathematicians like Terry Tao. Ooh, yay! Okay, well, all right. I mean, 99% of the planet doesn't have any idea who he is. So, but yeah, he like that's different. I think because he's the one running it, versus being like, okay, we're going to start a social network and we're going to sign up 100 celebrities to have profiles on the site, and that's what is going to draw a bunch of users to the site. Okay. And then 6 weeks later, those celebrity accounts are dead because those celebrities have no reason to be on that site. And then the users are like, well, the reason I came here, who are you guys? I don't, you're all losers. I'm out of here. Right?
Yeah.
Uh, so that's not, I don't think that's really what's happening um, with Sean's site.
Yeah, he's definitely more ingrained in it
Yeah,
from what
yeah,
I've seen.
exactly. Yeah, he's, I
Has
mean,
a lot of
it's like
posting
basically
regularly.
his personality and like he is a lot of the site. I mean, he's a driving force. So, um,
I did see kind of rewinding back a little bit that you originally so you moved to Silicon Valley out in summer of 2006,
yes, sir.
graduating from University of Chicago with some sort of mathematical degree.
Yes, sir.
What kind of math?
Um, just math, I guess, abstract math, pure math. Uh, we don't really specialize. One of the, yeah, I guess one of the nice things about math or a math degree usually is that you don't have like a senior thesis or anything. Be- because math is such an old, like deep and old subject that you're basically like not really going to be doing learning new math in the world until you're doing your PhD. It's like what, and even then, not until like 2 or 3 years into your PhD. It's like you're a senior in college. What interesting math stuff could you possibly write? Like it's not. You're still learning the ropes. Like you haven't even reached, you know, 1920 in terms of math yet. So usually, most people, I would say most math degrees end somewhere around like 1898, like 1890 in terms of the chronology of, of mathematics. It's like it admits the entire 20th century of math for the most part, which is the most like intense mathematical century ever. Uh, so sort of funny in that way. But yeah, so it's just math.
I had one of my professors who I ended up befriending. He does mobile apps now, but he majored in chaos theory. So
Oh, cool.
that's my only real experience with math and math majors. I did notice on the site, besides the fact that it seems like you were writing pretty hard there for a while. I think 2009. Then you only had maybe 2 articles 2011 and maybe 3 articles 2012. Yeah, I kind of wondered what happened there. I mean, and now obviously not that you're not doing anything. Obviously, I'm sure you're staying quite busy, but now
You
with
are not the
stuff
first
gives
person
you
to ask me this.
the more time. And I mean, I read your writing. It seemed certainly good enough that you could or should continue.
I know. Uh,
Just
I
any
don't. There's no.
yeah.
I have no excuse for it other than like no. I mean, there's no excuse. Like I can say why, but it's the same silly reasons that everyone says why about like I can't think of anything to write. Nothing's really come up. It's not true that I haven't been writing. Like if you look at my Quora profile, for example, um, I have many blog like within the last 2 years, probably 2 or 3 dozen blog post length answers on a variety of subjects. So I'm not writing on my blog.
Sounds like you need
Um,
to curate them and
yeah, so that's
cross
one
pollinate.
that's yeah, so that's definitely one thing I'm kind of want to do. And anyways, I mean, I know what it's like. You write when you write. It's not. Sorry. I mean the opposite of what that sounded like. It's not as if you write when it comes to you. You write by just dedicating some amount of time every day to writing. It's not like rocket science. It's not.
Yeah.
When the spirit moves me, although that's how I'm behaving basically, which is I know rationally not the way to write productively. So
You got to churn.
yeah,
But
exactly.
I did see and I wanted to bring attention to, especially since it's older. the Dear Jesse letter.
Oh, great.
So, I mean, I have some tidbits here. I'll read a little bit of it, kind of summarizing it and
It's
whatnot.
definitely the most personal thing I've published on my blog for sure.
So I mean, I'll let you open it up, but just as someone who else who read it, dear Jesse, and one of the things you mentioned. So this is a letter to yourself. At current time, it was around 2012, and it seems like it's kind of a letter to 4 or 5 years back, in what you have learned after Open Hive and moving out to Silicon Valley. You mentioned one of the best things is that people are really friendly, open, and very helpful.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned that a lot of people like to basically just talk, 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 and gossip all day long about who's doing what and such. You say the big secret is to do valuable work and share it. Quite a novel idea. And I really like this part where you
Easier said than
say,
done.
forget meetups, getting coffee, and quick phone calls. Doing valuable work and sharing it is the best way to build a network. It becomes your calling card. Idle meetings are the Silicon Valley equivalent of showing up empty handed to a potluck. Everyone is happier if you bring something unique and delicious. Until you can do that, you're better off practicing your kitchen skills. You want to be able to point to something fantastic and say, I did that. I know you, and you, this is once again, I know you can be independent and stubborn, but don't be afraid to ask for help in your work. So those are a few things I distilled from it that I thought
Yeah.
were quite interesting.
Yeah.
I
Sorry. Yeah.
I mean, being where you're at now, it's maybe a year, another 2 years from that letter. Do you feel like anything has changed? Is it still Silicon Valley, same old way it is, or
Yeah. I don't think much has changed. I mean, um, I read it, and although I mean, you have to keep in mind that this is meant was meant as advice specifically for me,
yeah,
and not a universal thing. But yeah, it's still doing the same old stupid things like not asking for help enough. Still doing that. Um, and uh, yeah, I'm more inclined, even then when I wrote it, more inclined to take a random meeting, but because I know that there is like value I can bring sometimes, versus when I first moved out here, it was like, or friends of mine who move out here, and they spend a lot of their time early on like networking, or they're like, how do I get into the community? Do I attend this or that? And it's like, I don't. It's like just gonna wind up. I think you'll just wind up chasing your tail for the most part. Um, I mean, for me, the big revelation was an early project I worked on that had some success was a Facebook analytics service called, if you know appdata.com, it's similar to appdata.com, called Autonomics. And this is back in 2007, so the Facebook platform had just launched. And everybody who's a Facebook application developer was using it. Keep in mind that at the time there were maybe 50 of us, so it's like everybody knew everybody.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, so for a long time I was the guy who did that. And suddenly after I launched that, people started emailing me out of the blue, wanting to talk to me, and I was like, well, "What is going on? I'm confused." Uh, but that was my calling card for a long time. Now, very few people remember it, and things like Everlane or whatever are my calling card. Um, so
So it
it's
almost seems
hard.
like it's a. I mean, there's two things. I mean, one, it's the age old bring value. Bring value. If you want to be an interesting person, you do that by doing interesting things. Um, but it almost seems like it's an attraction. I can't believe I'm about to say this. It sounds like a law of attraction type thing, but basically, if you create something really good, then other people will notice it, most likely recognize it, and from that, a network builds.
Well, I should say for the record, I think um, things like the law of attraction and the secret, like if I had an enemy in the world, like if I had like it would be that. I can't stand that kind of
I hear you.
magical woo woo thinking. Um, it's more like uh,
I don't mean to compare it in the same.
no, no, no.
I
I know,
feel
I know. I
you.
just wanted to
Yeah.
just for the record. It's I guess when I was writing, I was thinking more about a person sitting on a chair, deciding how to spend their time, and being like, because I guess it's easy to get caught up in, to use a cliche, the rat race out here. And you're surrounded by people. Since I moved here, I've had half a dozen friends who have exited companies for tens of millions of dollars or more. And not me, I haven't, not even close, not even on the same like 2 or 3 orders of magnitude of that. Um, and that's kind of bizarre, right? You're surrounded by people who one day they have $10,000 in their bank account, and then the next day they've made $150 million. Is that normal? I don't know, but people act like it's normal, and people sit down. I've had so many people I know be like, "Oh, I need to start $1 billion company." Come on, that's not. I
Yeah.
don't. That's not where your head should be. Like, just focus on. If you need to start $1 billion company to do the work you want to do, then start $1 billion company. But don't, like what? Like what are you doing? Like what's your work? Um, and it's
Well,
really
every
easy to
billion
get.
dollar company starts out with, you know,
Yeah,
10
right. That's
grand
the
in
that's the
sales to 100 grand in sales. It doesn't just, oh, they made
yeah,
$1 billion yesterday.
exactly, right. And everybody knows that, but nevertheless, you're still surrounded by this feeling of like, this is what you're supposed to be doing. This is how you should be spending your time and attention. These are the things you should care about. Um, and it's hard to detach yourself from that because it's like a stew you're just floating around in. Uh, and so for me, that like just do good work is kind of it's less like me sitting down and being like think positive thoughts, and it's more like sitting down and thinking like stop worrying about that stuff, just do good work, like just focus on doing good work. And it's definitely not enough to just do good work, which is why I had that other half in there, which is do good work and share it with other people. I have friends. In fact, I wrote that specifically with certain friends of mine in mind who do amazing shit, brilliant shit, but not only have no interest, but are almost antagonistic to the idea of writing a blog post about what they just did with an eye towards getting other people interested in it. They're like, I already wrote the code. The code speaks for itself. Why do I need to do anything else? Oh, okay. I mean,
Yeah.
that's your preference. I'm not going to begrudge you that, but there's like some serious low-hanging fruit here. We're literally, if you just wrote a blog post about it, I think just one, honestly, like 20bits.com started off as a collaboration, it was supposed to be, between me and another friend. And I spent all my time writing blog posts, and he spent all his time writing code and never publishing blog posts. And so then it just became my blog. So, um,
The blog thief.
the blog thief, yeah. I was like, yeah, Isaac, you should write some blog posts. He's like, oh, yeah, meh, nah. But here's some cool code I wrote. God damn it. All right, maybe I'll write some blog posts about your code. Yeah, so when I wrote that, it was more that kind of stuff in mind of like ignore the chattering class because there is a chattering class out here, um, and sometimes it's fun to shoot the shit about that stuff, but for a lot of people, that seems to be the focal point of their attention. For entrepreneurs, it doesn't make sense. For
Yeah.
investors, it makes a little bit more sense because your job is to know who's doing what and like what's coming next. But yeah, so that was sort of the stuff I had in mind when I came out here, and especially when I was younger because I hadn't had any kind of. Um, it's not that I haven't had success in my, but I've had like some like moderate success. When I first moved out here, I had none of it, and it was like, am I ever? How do I? What do I do to get that? Well, you sort of don't do it by worrying so much about whether or not what you're doing is going to be successful. My blog taught me that really well in the sense that
Hmm.
the things I would publish that I thought would really resonate often didn't, and things that I wrote off the cuff, people would say were the favorite thing they wrote ever. I wrote ever. I was like totally unable to predict what people would be interested in reading and why.
I think that kind of does feed back into startups a little bit in the sense of you really don't know what kind of response you're going to get until you put
Exactly.
something out there.
And after a year or two of writing my blog, it's uncomfortable, but I basically just gave up trying to predict. And I was like, whatever I'm doing, there's something about the way I'm thinking about doing this, or something about the way I'm going about writing, that every 2 or 3 blog posts produces something that people really dig. So I should just keep doing that and not worry. Like, this process seems to be working. I should worry less about every individual blog post. Like, worry more about the war and less about every individual battle. Because it's
A,
like,
a blogger I like, Sebastian Marshall, talks about churn a lot, and he mentions he's like, listen, when it all is said and done, you're going to be judged by your top 10 best blog posts.
yep,
No one's going to point to that one blog post that really kind of sucked and just hammer you over it.
yeah,
No
it's
one
true.
really cares.
I have on my shelf a collection of basically all of Orwell, like George Orwell's essays and newspaper columns he published. There's plenty of stuff in there that's like not. He's like writing about a trip he took to the zoo, and making some sarcastic joke about a politician nobody remembers, and
Yeah.
it's like, all right, but people remember like 1984, politics of the English language, you know, Animal Farm, almost to Catalonia. So yeah, that's definitely true. It's about putting yourself in a position where you'll do good work, which is how I think about what I do. Is like, where do I need to be in order to do good work? And sometimes that's starting a company, and sometimes it's not. And worrying less about whether starting a company per se is like what I should be doing. I try, I should say. It's a very difficult thing to do, day in and day out, because you're surrounded by people who are telling you like, no, 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 that's not what you want. So
Yeah, it is. It does sound like you're getting a lot of outside influence. I mean, I'm based in Orlando right now currently, so
fact,
the the other the startup community obviously is nothing near what it is out there.
right?
So on an influence level, and you're not kind of not getting those things. How do you feel that has helped though?
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, so
no,
you've been in basically Silicon Valley type San Francisco in that scene.
seven,
You
eight
know,
years now. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say since you started, because I mean, you graduated college and then you went out there, so that's really when you kind of got your start. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
fair to
yeah,
say?
yeah. I mean, no, I don't mean to paint like a negative picture of the culture. I love it. Um, in the same way that like honestly, I imagine it's like can be similar to politics in a sense that uh, there are politicians who are really there doing good work. They care about doing good work, and there are aspects of the political culture that they love, and there are aspects of the political culture that come along with it, which are negative. It's just the same way out here, and uh, you can't. It's like you can't really separate the two. Like everyone's doing it, so everyone's talking about doing it, and it reinforces itself in that way. So it's great that everyone is doing it, and that gives you access to opportunities that are impossible to find in other places. Um, and but in aggregate, it's kind of like endless navel gazing conversation sometimes. Um, I don't care what the startup is doing next. Like it's really not that important. Oh, did you hear so and so left, and now he's doing this and that? No, I didn't, and I don't really care that much.
Yeah.
I hope he's loving it, I guess, but like I don't want to talk about it. And and I think most people feel the same way as I do. And like when you're sitting down with a small group of people and you're talking about it, it's like the weather, I guess, right? You, like if you meet someone new, what are you going to talk about? Oh, what's the weather? Oh, hey, did you hear about what? Oh, did you read the thing Paul Graham wrote? Like, did you, oh, hey, did you see Nest? Google acquired Nest. What do you think about that? Right? Like, this is sort of what you talk about, and then it gets elevated to,
Nice weather connection there with the Google and the Nest. Well played.
yeah, that was unintentional, but I'll still take credit for it. Yeah, I don't know.
And also, so how do you, I mean, because obviously a lot of entrepreneurs can't just afford, or, startup guys can't just afford to go out to, San Francisco. For example, I saw on Reddit, on our minimalism, it was an example of a studio and, how he effectively used the space. And then, of course, someone posted and asked how much, what he was paying. And it doesn't really. I mean, you look at the space; it's small, it's beautiful though, and it doesn't really punch you in the gut. So it's like, oh, it's 1650 a month for 310 square feet, and you're like,
Yeah,
geez. And I also remember seeing an article about young San Francisco professionals who are choosing to live in RVs,
yeah.
which is another interesting kind of counter movement to the, how expensive things are out there.
Well, so I moved out here with a duffel bag and like $5,000 in my bank account, and my first job paid $50,000 a year. But this is also 7 years ago, and it's gotten more expensive. Um, there are places you can live in San Francisco that aren't that crazy expensive. If you're paying 1650 for a studio, you're living in one of the like top five most desirable San Francisco neighborhoods for sure. Um, if you want to go live out like way out by the ocean or something, which is not really near the rest of like the sort of heart of the city,
Yeah.
you're not going to be paying that much, but you'll also be sort of detached from a lot of what's happening in the city. So that's where I lived for the first year and a half that I lived out here. And similarly, you have Oakland too, which is a lot cheaper. And I have friends who make 35 to 55K a year and get by just fine in San Francisco. I think it's just a matter of what your expectations are. Get a bike. um, but yeah, it's true that rental prices have gone through the roof. Um, like I live in one of the more sort of like desirable neighborhoods,
Hmm.
and I have a two-bedroom apartment to myself that I've had for about 4 years now, and I basically can't move because I would pay more for a one-bedroom or a studio than I would for what I'm paying for this two-bedroom right now. Which, just to give you a sense of how much rental prices have gone up, it's nuts. Um,
Because
it
are you
used
like grandfathered in on the lease, or you own it,
Yeah.
or you?
No, it's just, yeah, I'm grandfathered in on the lease. And yeah, uh, it used to be when I first moved here, if you wanted a nice place, you should expect to pay about $1,000 per bedroom per month. That was like the ballpark. And now it's closer to like twice that. And that's just over the last 3 or 4 years. So that's kind of crazy. Uh, and I don't envy anyone who has to look in this environment, but um, I know lots of folks who have you live somewhere else. You don't have to live in the middle of the city.
Yeah.
And for people who have been out here, I didn't know this before I moved out, being a wide-eyed Midwestern boy, I guess. Uh, how tightly connected everything is. You know, it's depending on where you live in Oakland, maybe it's a 20-minute BART ride, 15-minute BART ride, right? So it's actually not a big deal. Like if you work off of one of the main BART stops, getting to work every morning is not. It's actually not a big deal. It's actually no worse than commuting from inside San Francisco to some other part of San Francisco. So uh, I think it's just harder. It takes more work, but it's not. It's definitely not say, an impossibility.
Do you think it'd be
And
better to kind of build up to be able to move out there, or just kind of get out there and rough it and just kind of make it work?
I just, I think it's just honestly an issue of expectations. I probably have some amount of money saved up, but like I said, I moved out here with whatever money was in my bank account when I graduated college, not much,
Yeah.
and like a, my luggage, uh,
The shirt
and
on my back.
the shirt on my back, landed at San Jose as the first time I've ever been to California. And I was like, I guess I'm a Californian now. Um, and that's reckless, right? Like
Yeah, you're young.
I had a place to live.
Yeah.
Like I was moving out to live with some friends, so I would not move out here without having at least like 2 or 3 months of living situated. Moving out here without having that situated, that would be crazy. Or friends who will be very generous with their couches. Otherwise, like the rent, finding a place to rent is so bananas. Like you just have to be on the ball. I don't know how you would do it without actually being here. Um, People go to do all kinds of crazy stuff. So
Turning a topic here a bit. Have you been involved in funding at all, or have you kind of seen it? I personally haven't been as close to it. Have ironically mentioned Paul Graham, read some of his articles, and being doing more research on it and just trying to understand that a little bit more. I'm just
you
wondering if you
mean
if
I
you've
mean
seen its
on
impact or the drain it can have on a company or just
raising money? You mean?
yeah.
Yeah, I have. I mean, we raised money at Everlane, and we talked with a bunch of VCs at Dev Bootcamp. Um, uh, Although at Everlane it was us looking for investment. At Dev Bootcamp it was investors who just wanted to invest in us. They came to
Much
us.
much better position, I
It
imagine.
is a much better position. It definitely does change things. I think what people don't realize is, well, it depends on, I don't know, there's different kinds of money you raise, but if you're raising a Series A, well, I think what many entrepreneurs don't realize is that you're, unless you're an exception, like Facebook or something, you're signing up to give yourself a boss. Which isn't to say
I
you're, which
prefer an
is,
overlord.
yeah, which isn't to say you're giving away control. You shouldn't be if you're doing it right. But you are now no longer sort of, there's someone up the chain, so to speak, you're accountable to. Um, there's like a third party person who you're, well, fund, I guess, who you're actually both, I mean, both legally and like ethically accountable to. Um, and it didn't, I mean, Everlane needed capital uh, because
Being product based, I
yeah, we
basically a
make things.
given.
Um, and there are pros and cons. I mean, I don't know. Without naming names, it's really important to know what your investor is like. And there's like no amount of due diligence one can do that's like too excessive, in my opinion. Um, so definitely some of the investors we had at Everlane were like, in retrospect, we were like,
Wasn't the right fit.
yeah, I wish they weren't one of our investors. But there are other investors. I'll give a shout out to two in particular, Brian Sugar and Nils Johnson, who have been like fantastically helpful. Uh, and they're both angels. Um, so when it's great, and when it's bad, it's like really bad. Uh, and I'll
Sounds
say
like
one thing.
relationships.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say I was thankful for, which because Michael worked in finance. I mean, he worked in actually private equity, so he knew a lot of he knew how to be sort of neurotically diligent around this stuff. Um, I think for first-time entrepreneurs, some of the contractual things can seem overwhelming, but it's important to like really understand every little moving part, like who can vote for what and why, um, who has uh, what rights are possible for you to have, and just making sure you understand uh, basically every line in the thing you're signing of that magnitude, and not feeling, maybe you'll feel embarrassed, I don't know, but just like not caring that much if asking apparently stupid questions over and over and over again until you really understand it, like makes you look bad or something. Like it's vital, both for you as the entrepreneur and also the people who don't have a say in those conversations if you have employees, right?
Did you guys because some of what I'm reading, which is kind of interesting because I see a parallel to what you said about good work and networking. Um, because it kind of seems like, right, so the good work side would be do good work and you'll get recognized for it, and you'll kind of network. Obviously, yeah, you got to put yourself out there a little bit. It kind of seems like a startup's somewhat similar in the sense of, if you just create this awesome startup, you're just going to easily get fundraisers. Well, not, I mean, you're usually going to raise funds. That's not realistic for most, startups. And a lot of, what I've been reading, they seem to like the notion of always be raising, kind of always making connections and networking with those VCs so that when you do need to raise the funds, you kind of have already built that relationship. So with you guys at Everlane, was it more like, hey, we need money now, let's go find money, or was there, you know,
Well, we had some pre-existing relationships for sure. I mean, you need to have some kind of relationship, but tactically, it's generally important not to be. The rule of thumb I hear a lot is like when you decide you're going to raise money, like if you decide you're going to be raising money in January, for the 4 or 5 months before that, you should not be talking to investors. Um, and honestly, nothing gets an investor more excited than saying like, if they ping you and they're like, "Hey, we'd love to talk about your business," being like, "That's fine." Like, "Hey, thanks for reaching out. Things are really busy here. Um, a bunch of other VCs have been reaching out to us too recently, but we're not looking to raise funds now. We probably will be come January. I'll reach back out to you then." And that's like it's like VC catnip, right? They're like, oh my God, what? There's other VCs. Like, why don't they want me to talk to like
why is he not calling me back?
exactly? It's like playing hard to get. So there is this give and take, um, and and I will say relationships are more important once you have a sort of a track record. Like if you've worked with a VC before and you want to work with them again, um, but I would say like the first time at bat, it's not this either or. Like it's not the case that uh, you should never spend time ever talking to VCs ever. But if you're going to give somebody one piece of advice to like simplify it, it's better to just focus on building something that is successful rather than spending time networking. Like especially if it's like your first time through. So usually when you hear that advice, I think of it more in those terms, which is it's advice meant to be given, not universally, but it's like, look, man, you just need to focus on making your product work. Do your customers love it? It's like focus on the fundamentals first.
Yeah.
The other stuff does add value. It can add value if you know how to do it well, but it's not the fundamentals. Like if you try to do that but don't have that other stuff, it's just not going to work. Yeah, you might get the meeting, you might even be able to pitch the partnership, but they're gonna, unless they're a joker of an investor, they're gonna see right through it and be like, yeah, you don't have anything, or there's something fundamentally flawed about what you're doing. Uh, so
So worry about building that more first before you kind of consider the fundraising aspect.
Yeah,
It
I mean,
does seem
because
like too, if you have
for
the
people,
users and the traction, makes it an easier buy,
yeah,
easier to sell.
you just need, I mean, you just, uh,
Oh, just create a great product. So simple.
right, yeah, um, yeah. All you need, it's more subtle than that. I mean, after Everlane, we signed up. I don't know, in the month, like 2 or 3 weeks before we launched, signed up, I think about 200,000, 250,000 people to our mailing list. And then pretty quickly, the VCs who before were like, yeah, but is anyone really interested? Then they were like, yeah, but will they spend any money? And it's like, all right, just move those goalposts.
Hmm.
So it's easy to just like chase that, right? But then you're playing. It's like, okay, okay, what's your focus? Are you building this to satisfy this other person's opinion, who all evidence points to them not wanting to be satisfied for whatever reason, or your customers who may actually be willing to like be excited about what you're doing? Like, all right, you're like a VC investor. You're not our customer. We're not building this product for you.
But then it also seems like there's a happy middle because, or maybe an unhappy middle because you can't serve those customers if you don't have enough, capital. I mean, in a more digital-based startup, not as much. Obviously, with Everlane being more physical, it's kind of a better example because 200,000 people want our products. That's great. We can't afford to produce that many. What
Yep.
if?
Yeah. No, that was a problem early on at Everlane. It can kind of play to our advantage for a while because it means it seems slightly more exclusive. Stuff sells out more quickly. Um, but the
Turns
fourth
one
time
piece into
someone
a
comes
stream.
to a site, the fourth time someone comes to a site and everything's sold out, they're like, I'm just giving up now. So that's not good.
Yeah.
um, yeah, you're right, and there is a middle ground. I think for people who and Everlane is a special case because basically startups have very little marginal cost. Most startups have their marginal cost is like almost zero, whereas Everlane's is very real. It's like $5 for a shirt or something.
Yeah.
So
You should know exactly how much transparency. Gosh.
yeah, I don't even remember. Um, but yeah, for people who are just starting out, you're right that there is like a happy medium, but the priority should not be finding that happy medium. It needs to be like get the product and the customer facing stuff right first, and then figure out how to like if it's like you have two weights and you're trying to balance them. There's sort of like three things you need to do. It's like figure out weight one, figure out weight two, and then figure out how to balance them. So if you're spending all your time trying to balance these two weights that you don't actually have figured out, that's like just not going to work. And then between weights one and weights two, you need weight one first, where weight one is like the product. It's like product plus recalcitrant investor might work, but like investor plus totally dysfunctional product will not work.
Yeah.
The investor will see through it, or they'll invest and now you'll be trapped. That's actually the worst in my mind, is when you like raise a bunch of money for a product that winds up not quite working, and now you're in this really horrible situation of like your hands are sort of tied in a way. It's like you signed up for a rodeo that you're like, I don't want to be here anymore. Um,
Yeah.
so it's as even though it seems like I want the investment money, it's as much for the entrepreneur as it is for anything else. Which is like, are you sure you want to raise money for this? Uh,
Makes sense. And it's almost becomes its own nightmare of whoops, got money. This doesn't work. Now what?
yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I have plenty of friends for whom that has happened. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. Like sometimes they pivot. Other times it's like it just becomes this like march, and eventually they're just like, yeah, we need to stop marching. It's not going anywhere. Uh, and the investors usually check out well before that point, right? It's like the investors are not going to generally be there day in and day out. And as things get more and more difficult, and it might not even be difficult, like it might be like kind of working, but in a sort of zombie-like state, the investors are just going to stop paying so much attention because they're like, yeah, this company's probably not going to deliver the returns we want. So it's rational for them to do that. I don't like. It's not like,
Yeah.
screw you guys. But I have friends who have been in that situation, and it's in some ways worse. Uh, it's very demoralizing.
And last thing, since it seems like you've always been in programming, how important do you feel that is to be a part of a startup or to understand the culture, be a founder? Is it
I don't. I mean, I don't
at
think it's
least knowing the
critical.
language, or where do you think it?
I mean, I think it's. Uh, I think it will. Well, there's a level at which it's no different than any other skill in the sense that engineering founders have the same problem in reverse. Like they don't know what sales and marketing look like, so they don't know how to talk, hire, or manage sales and marketing people. Um, and that's a problem, and they need to get over that. And the opposite is true too. Like if it's not that one needs to know how to program, but one does need to know how to communicate with engineers, understand the world as engineers understand them, and that might be more vital depending on the startup, right? Um, so I don't think it's critical that one needs to know how to program per se. Excuse me. But one definitely needs to know how to like empathize with engineers. Uh, I would say especially early on because the founder is going to be the de facto PM most likely, and that's one of the core responsibilities of a product manager is communicating with engineers effectively. Like, why are they pushing back? Okay, well, engineers aren't always going to be like, it's the same thing as I was saying before. You have to be able to communicate with those other people in their terms and not insist that they communicate uh, with you in your terms. And the higher, in my opinion, the higher one is up in an organization, the more that is true. The more responsibility one has to communicate in the other person's vernacular and not insist that they communicate in yours. Um, so I think learning how to program can mean a lot of things. It can mean I understand the moving parts. I can write a basic program. I can hack a script together. I'm familiar with the kind of like, I know what it's like to not anticipate, to misanticipate something and waste a day because of some unforeseen hiccup. I know what that's like, and like nothing gets an engineer more like, well, some things maybe, but very few things get an engineer more upset than a person being like, "Hey man, you said it would be shipped on X date. We decided on it." And that happened at some conversation at the start where a person, you just like picked some arbitrary date. Okay, we're going to ship this at the end of the week. Go. And it doesn't happen. And they're like, why are you fucking up? You said to be done at the end of the week. And they're like, well, this thing came up. And they're like, well, it's your responsibility to anticipate that. Like, oh, okay, well, yes and no.
You can't anticipate the
You
unknown.
can't anticipate everything. Hey, Amazon went down. Oh, okay. What are you gonna do, man? Like, sorry,
Yeah.
we didn't ship the thing. Like, so if someone's totally oblivious to that stuff, and the like ignorant PM or ignorant founder might be like, well, then we should switch out of AWS then. No, it's not gonna be, man. Why are you making this really hard for us here? Uh, Whereas if that person had even just like a little bit of empathy for like what is actually going on, they'd realize that the problem isn't, for example, engineers being bad at estimating deadlines. It's like the reality of building something in an underspecified environment subject to sudden dramatic changes uh, that you just have to account for those things. Um,
it almost sounds like it would be on the PM manager then to have set an earlier, try to account for it in the deadline. So when it's not shipped
Maybe. I
on the
mean,
8th,
if you sort of
they
go
need
full
it to be available.
agile, if you go full agile, like the idea is you wouldn't have deadlines at all. It would just be like a stack of work tasks that are tiny, and you just ship them all ASAP in some order, so that you're continuously shipping, and it's not an issue of like these big batch chunks of work where you're doing 20 things, and if any one of those 20 things goofs up, the other 19 things fail. That's like it's like, and the more of that you have, I mean, this is basically what lean is, right? It's like
Hmm.
if you're trying to do 100 things at once and they're all subtly dependent on each other and one of them breaks, then all of them will break in some way probably. And the problem isn't that you need to stop that one thing from breaking, because like the more things you do at once, the odds of at least one of them breaking gets significantly higher. So you need to do things in smaller chunks so that when something does break, because it will break eventually, it's not so catastrophic. It's like you want to minimize that like catastrophic scenario, and so you avoid situations where you're like changing 20 things at once. That's a great way to, like, if you have a sprint where it's like we're changing 20 things at once. Like I, as a PM or an engineering manager, would scream bloody murder. I'd be like, this is your. There are certain emergency situations where maybe you've now backed yourself into a corner. You have no other choice, which means there's a deeper problem, right? Like, why are we in this situation to begin with? We messed up somewhere earlier. Now that we're in this situation, like I grant we have to do this crazy sprint, but we shouldn't have to do this crazy sprint. Um, so we'll do it, and then let's figure out why we had to do it. Uh, but if someone isn't understanding that stuff, not just intellectually, but like viscerally, like they're scared of a sprint that looks like that. They're like, no, no, no. And I think, in my opinion, engineers tend to be pretty like defensive because people tend not to understand these things. And so they're like, fine, you insist on some deadline, but I know who's going to be waking up at 3 a.m. when the shit hits the fan. It's going to be me and not you. Uh, and so I think learning how to program from a management perspective not only makes engineers more receptive because they know you're like willing to put your uh, um, like you walk the walk to some extent. Um, it also just helps you see the world a little more like they see it. And I think that's true of any. I mean, I think founders should understand marketing for the
Yeah.
same reasons in sales and stuff. I mean, it's the same. It's the same deal. Like, you need to be able to talk to a marketer like a marketer thinks, um, or at least know enough to
So
be able to
I
have those
guess the,
conversations.
the answer to the question kind of then is you need to have enough knowledge of all skills required. And if, I have more of a marketing background, so for me it's programming, but for the programmer it might be marketing. And it's
Yeah, I think there does need to, for a founder, needs to be a base level of like a horizontal thing. Um, and it doesn't need to be super sophisticated, but like if there were a founder who didn't know how to program, challenging themselves to be like, okay, I am going to write a tic-tac-toe game, and then feel the humbling that happens when it takes them a month to do it, and when they ask one of their friends to do it and it takes them 15, 20 minutes. And the same can be true of engineers. Go go run a marketing campaign. Like, go, you know, build a blog that generates 10,000 uniques a month. They'll see that it's not like smoke and mirrors. There's actual like really hard work that you need to do in order to make that stuff happen. And it's just you appreciate it more. You appreciate the hard work that other people have to do. That seems easy because you're just not exposed to it. So, um, but I don't think you need to learn the nitty gritty ins and outs of how to program in order to be a good founder. I know too many amazing CEOs and founders who don't have that level of technical expertise. I don't think that's not definitely not a necessary condition to being a successful founder.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're gonna wrap it up here. I know
Yeah,
I've
absolutely.
been on a little while. I know
Yeah.
people can reach you at,
Jesse at 20bits.com.
and also, so
JES.
your website is
Oh
20bits
yeah, and my website is 20bits.com.
or
You can
at
read.
jfarmer.
Yeah, Twitter at jfarmer. Uh,
Is there anything you are looking to do next? Anything you want people to reach out to you for? I mean, you kind of got an open window right now.
fair enough. Yeah, I mean,
Anything you're interested in?
I am. I'm working on a bunch of projects in education. So if you're interested in teaching people either how to program for the first time or um, teaching more advanced subjects in programming, then or designing curriculum, or if you just like talking about how to teach, then you should reach out because I could talk about that forever.
All right. Sweet, man. Well, much appreciated you coming on here. I'm
Yeah,
gonna
absolutely.
bug you about writing. I
All
already got two
right.
subjects for you.
Yeah, oh, great.
I won't be
I,
too
I need
annoying, I
an I need an
promise.
accountability buddy. All right.
All right.
And actually, I'll say I do write best when someone asks me a direct question and I answer it, which is why I think Quora is so good for me.
There
It's
you
like, here's a
go.
question, and I'm like, well, let me tell you 20 paragraphs of like, here's what I think you meant to ask, but maybe you meant to ask this other thing. Anyways, all right. So thanks, Dan.
Sounds good, man. Appreciate having you on
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. See ya.
Have a
Have
good
a
one.
good one.